So Marvel's latest epileptic seizure waiting to happen has premiered and I have seen it. Am I able to circumvent through all the fan service and see what this thing's really all about? Well, let's find out. Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is brought to us by director Sam Raimi and stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Elizabeth Olsen, and Xochitl Gomez, I think? Sorry. Dr. Stephen Strange casts a forbidden spell that opens the doorway to the multiverse, including alternate versions of himself, whose threat to humanity is too great for the combined forces of Strange, Wong, and Wanda Maximoff. Alright, so this is a spoiler-free review of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. If you want to know my spoiler thoughts, then I am doing a spoiler review of it. That will be coming out one day after this review, and that will be right here, or, you know, wherever they put it. Now, being that this is spoiler-free, and I have this other review that's just gonna ruin everything for everybody and talk about all of it, I am going to be pretty vague in detail when it comes to this movie in this review. I am not going to sit here and give you a synopsis beyond what I said a moment ago about what this movie is, because that unto itself could be spoilery. So, all I can really say is whether I liked the movie or not, and I gotta say that yes, I did enjoy this movie. Do I think it's the second coming of Christ or anything? No, but it was a very enjoyable movie. It ain't perfect, but it is very solid. First and foremost, Sam Raimi. A lot has been made about Raimi directing this movie, and as many of you know, this isn't the first comic book movie that Raimi has directed. In fact, of course, he did do the original Spider-Man trilogy, and many forget about the Darkman movie back in the 90s, which while it wasn't adapted from a comic book, it did end up being a comic book, and it was very comic book superhero-ish in nature. This is a Marvel movie, and honestly, in the past, it really hasn't made a lot of sense why Marvel has gone and gotten some larger profile directors at times to direct their movies, because they put such constraints on them as to what they can do. And while we do see some of that here for sure, I am happy to report that this is very much a Sam Raimi movie. It's also a Marvel movie, but Sam Raimi definitely puts his stamp on it. If you've been a fan of Raimi's over the years, you will see many of his Raimi-isms throughout this film. But the most prevalent bit of his style that is in this movie that I noticed was its pace. This movie moves at a lightning fast pace. It starts and it just doesn't stop until the end, and that is how Raimi's movies are a lot of the time. They are very fast and manic at times. This is honestly probably the fastest moving Marvel movie to date. And in an age when these Marvel movies are starting to approach closer and closer to that 3-hour runtime every time they come out, to see this one that moves at such a fast, brisk clip and only clocks in at right over just 2 hours was really refreshing. As I mentioned, there is a lot of stuff here, and while I did enjoy the vast majority of it, there are times that the movie becomes a bit much. It's almost like overload, and longtime Raimi fans will know what that is, but when it comes to overload with a Marvel movie, it's just a whole lot of deep mythology coming at you from all kinds of different directions, and you're just like, wait, okay, just fucking stop for a second. It never ruined the movie, it never pulled me totally out, but there were times that I feel like there was so much being thrown at me that there was stuff that I missed. I don't think any of it was necessarily important to the story, but there is a lot of actual stuff in the background just going at you at all times that would be neat to see that you just don't have a chance to see because there's just so much. Some may say that that makes repeat viewings all that much better, and you may be right, but honestly for me, while I was watching it, it just seemed a bit cluttered at times. That being said, there is a lot of stuff here that longtime MCU fans are going to be very happy to see. The fan service is real, and it is prevalent through almost the entirety of this movie. However, I will say that it never felt like this fan service was too much. It didn't ever really feel like the fan service was just there to be fan service. Now, I'm not stupid. I understand that these things were probably initially put in this movie, like in the conceptual phases of this film. They were put there because the studio said, hey, you need to put this in this movie because we know that people are going to like it, people want to see it. And you'll run into that in some of these types of movies, and you can absolutely tell, oh, that was just dropped in there and they just tried to work it in. But in Raimi's capable hands, he was able to weave these things into the story in a very natural way for the most part. Unfortunately though, I guess depending on how you look at it, and this isn't the movie's fault, many of these moments that were supposed to be big surprises, I had already had spoiled for me, unfortunately. Because the internet gonna internet. And yeah, I know, people say, well, when it's coming up to a movie like this, just stay off the internet for a few days leading up to it. Well, you know, my job, I'm on the internet most of the day. I can't really do that. I didn't go seeking this stuff out. It just showed up and oh, there it is, it's spoiled. So many of these big reveals, many of these characters that I didn't know were gonna be there had either A, been 100% spoiled for me leading up to the movie, or B, talked about ad nauseum because there was some leak or something like that. So there really wasn't a whole lot about this movie that just surprised the shit out of me when I saw it. That doesn't mean these parts weren't exciting and fun, but they just didn't have that same wow factor that I think they were going for because I already knew it was coming. Now on the plus side of that, that means that I was able to go into this movie knowing that these big surprises were coming, and when it got to those moments, I judged the movie less on this big wow surprise moment that is only really one time and more on the actual story and what was going on in the moment. I liken it kind of to watching, say, something like Spider-Man Far From Home after you saw it in theaters, watching it when it finally came out on home video at home. You already know about all the big reveals and everything, so when you see it, you're able to look at the movie for just that, just the movie, not the oh my god surprise factor. And as far as this movie goes, yeah, I mean, it was good, it was entertaining. It's not great, I wasn't like, oh my god, but I know that some people will be. Overall, the narrative of this movie, while at times a bit sloppy and a bit much, was enjoyable. And one of the things that really made it stand out and made it all the more enjoyable is that this is, in fact, a Doctor Strange story. I know what you're saying, of course it is. It's Doctor Strange 2. Well, who else's story would it be? Well, you know what I mean. When we look at the MCU of the past few years, more and more of these standalone movies are less about the standalone character that they're named after and more about the entire world itself. They're more about building the MCU and less about that character. The earlier MCU movies were the exact opposite. They were more about these actual individual characters, and then they had a little bit of world building in them. And the Multiverse of Madness is kind of back to grassroots within reason. This is very much about Stephen Strange. I never felt like this is an MCU movie that Doctor Strange is in. I felt like this was a Doctor Strange movie that takes place in the MCU. World building's great, but at some point I want to know more about these specific characters, and Raimi did a great job with that here. Now, a lot's been said about the horror elements of this movie and that it's the first horror MCU movie. And while I can't comment too much on that here, I will say that yes, there are some elements here, but it's not nearly as much as I thought it was going to be considering how people were talking about it. There's some stuff, yeah, and I'm going to talk about that in my spoiler review, but just know that if, like me, I was expecting something a bit more horror themed from the way people were talking, no, that's not it. This is still an MCU movie. The performances for the most part are what you've come to expect from the MCU. However, I will say that you see a bit of Raimi's influence here as well. There are times that some of the performances seem a bit off. They seem a bit hokey, a bit stilted, if you will. But then you realize what it is. This is Sam Raimi, and that's how he directs his people in these kind of movies. They're a bit heightened. The dialogue is very comic book-esque, much more than the MCU typically has, and it's unashamed about it. Some of the lines spoken in this movie are kind of ridiculous, but the 100% commitment that everyone had kind of makes them work. Now, like I said, there are times, knowing what the MCU is, being used to that it stands out a bit and it seems a bit odd. But overall, everybody did a really good job, especially once you realize that this is Sam Raimi's movie. This is his type of performances, and at that point, a lot of it does start to click into place. Now, from the technical side of things, this is a multi-$100 million MCU movie, so we know what to expect. We know there's gonna be a lot of special effects and CGI in it, but man, there are a lot of special effects in this movie. And overall, they all look really good. However, one of the drawbacks to having so many special effects in your movie is that there are gonna be times that some of them aren't quite as good as some of the others. Now, none of them are terrible by any means, but there are a few moments, especially when comping real-world people with CGI assets, that seem a bit off. Doesn't pull you out of the movie or anything, and for the most part, this is a beautiful movie. It's got some really cool effects, but there are a few parts that you are gonna notice. Guys, overall, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was a bit of a return to form for the MCU, in my opinion, with a few trip-ups. It can come across as a bit bloated or overblown in a few spots, and it does fall victim to that thing that many MCU movies lately have, where these big reveals don't really stand up as much beyond their initial reveal. A few of the performances do seem a bit odd at first, but that's until you notice that that's just Sam Raimi doing his Sam Raimi thing. However, the story here is just fun as hell from beginning to end and moves at a hell of a pace. It was great to see that Raimi was able to put his actual stamp on the film, and while it does have a few trip-ups here or there, overall, it is absolutely worth a rent.
All he wanted was this.
I have to return some videotape.
While not perfect, this movie did a lot of things right. And what it did do right, it did really right. So if you, like me, have been a bit burned out on the MCU and were hoping that maybe at some point they get back to their grassroots, then check this one out one night. I think you're gonna have a really good time with it. So there it is, guys, my review of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. If you enjoyed and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button and help my little channel grow. If you want to help out the channel, check out my Patreon in the description below and become a jarhead and get some of the awesome benefits to go along with that, like these guys, and possibly join my top tier and become a bad motherfucker like my man Dragon Khan, Marge G, and Silverlock. If you liked what I had to say, give me a like. If not, let me know in the comments below why. And as always, stay sexy, Earth 413. So I can't believe I went that whole entire review and did not talk about the absolutely fucking amazing score. Danny Elfman is back at it and the man is on his game. I've been a huge Danny Elfman fan since his early Burton days back with like Edward Scissorhands and Batman 1989. Those iconic scores and ones like Spider-Man and especially Spider-Man 2 are what the guy is really known for. And it's been a while since I've heard that truly great Danny Elfman score, but here he does it again. This score is just fucking awesome and it is absolutely one of the highlights of the movie. So if you, like me, are a Danny Elfman simp, then check this one out because it's fucking on point.